the case of the Middle East and the ongoing conflict between Iran and the United States. The war started, the United States and Israel together attacked Iran. And then Donald Trump said, we're going to have some sort of pause, ceasefire. Later on, they signed a document called so-called MOU, and each and every clause of that MOU was violated so far. There is no MOU anymore. They literally destroyed everything in that document. The United States is back with the same concept. The blockade is back. Iran is controlling the Strait of Hormuz. The United States is trying to do again, repeating the Operation Freedom they had before. And Iran is attacking the tankers. One of the tankers yesterday, it was, at least we had a footage yesterday coming out and showing one of these Turkish tankers being, sunk in the Strait of Hormuz. This is the situation in the Strait. On the other hand, the two sides are fighting. The battlefield is in Iran and GCC countries. And GCC countries, basically most of these, countries are involved in the war. Just moments last night, we've learned that Oman was not part of the war, as you know, when the war started. Iran right now is attacking Oman. Last night they attacked one of these hotels in Oman, the Crown Palace Hotel. It seems one of the main hotels for U.S. troops. They hit the target. The crown of the hotel was targeted. It's some sort of assassination attack. This is the situation on the battlefield. Israel right now is not part of the war. Benjamin Netanyahu is so afraid of Iran attacking them, said if Iran attacks us, we're going to attack. We're going to, there would be no peace in the West Asia. This is the situation. Your understanding of what is going on and how do you evaluate that?
So, Nima, the only way U.S.-Israeli war against Iran ever made sense, that is, like under quotation mark made sense, was along the lines of Benjamin Netanyahu's phony sales pitch that, hey, if we carry out a surprise attack on Iran, launch decapitation strikes, kill the leadership, and we activate our assets on the ground, the protesters that the Mossad has been cultivating for many years, and then the aggressive the aggressive element that was armed, that was going to take the protests as a smokescreen to go in and then do a regime change in the similar way as it was done in Ukraine in 2014. Then that kind of a scenario from the empire's point of view might make sense. You take control of Tehran. You install your puppet Zelensky, Juan Guaido, whoever, and then they run the country on your behalf. They start carrying water for you. They start destroying the relationship they have with China, with Russia, and you get a brand new, very powerful beachhead on the Eurasian continent. So that scenario, if you're sitting in Washington, in Tel Aviv, in London, might have made sense, but it failed. And I think that everything that followed was just doubling down on failure. And now it seems to me that Trump is caught in the geopolitical equivalent of gambler's ruin. When like when you're on a gambling table and you're losing money, and you realize you're going to have to walk away with no money, or you just keep gambling, hoping that the next thing will turn out in your favor. So you keep just throwing more effort, more money, more resources, and then hope that somehow you're going to be able to topple the government, to maybe arm twist the Kurds, the Saudis, the Iraqis, to mount a ground invasion. I mean, Trump was even talking yesterday about like, oh yeah, the ground invasion, other people are going to do that for us. And then other state, Marco Rubio was saying, yeah, maybe Europeans like the French and the Germans should come to police the Strait of Hormuz. And then, if the Iranians attack them, then they're going to find themselves at war with Germany or with France. Like, what are you talking about? You're like going to volunteer France and Germany or whoever else to become co-belligerents, to become involved in your war of choice that failed in February. So everything is giving the impression that the Trump administration is making it up as they're going along. In other words, they're panicked. They clearly don't have a strategy, exit strategy, or any other kind of strategy, and all they have is like bombs and missiles, and so they're dropping bombs and missiles. But even evidence on the ground, as far as I've been able to see, suggests that they don't really know what targets to bomb. So they're just dropping bombs for the umpteenth time on the same targets, which are often like fishing villages and fishing boats and schools and hospitals, because Iran has had abundant time to make everything strategically important as protected as possible and as difficult for the United States to bomb as possible. And we can see the evidence on the ground, because they say like, oh, we destroyed their missile production and their launchers and everything. There's like, it's all gone, it's finished. And then Iran lobs another couple of hundred missiles and drones at them. And now Trump is saying like, oh yeah, Iran's going to be defeated very soon. It's just like any day now, and they're going to be totally defeated. It's like people forget that he was saying that 6 months ago, Iran was finished, that like everything was destroyed. There's nothing left. They're all, basically waving a white flag. I don't see a happy ending of this story for the United States or Israel. And then, there's also the money angle to this, because, lately, a lot of talk that's coming out from the American administration is revolving around money. So they, the Pentagon is running out of money. And people are surprised when I say this, but because they think like, wait a minute, the Fed can print up any amount of money that they want. They can't run out of money. Well, yes, but the Fed is not the commander in chief, and they don't have an army. It's the civilian government that is in charge of the army, and the funding relationship is not direct from the Fed to the army. So there are, as flawed as they are, there are checks and balances. So if Pentagon runs out of money, it has to go to Congress and request supplemental funding. So there was talk at first about another 70 billion or so. Then it was 350 billion or so. Then Trump comes out and says, oh yeah, we're going to be imposing 20% on all cargoes going through the gate of Strait of Hormuz. And then the day after that, he's like, okay, we're not going to do that. But the Gulf kingdoms, they're going to be investing in the United States, and they're going to be making a return. So it's a win-win for everybody. How fantastic. And then, Scott Bessent went to inspect the gold in Fort Knox, and he came out like, yep, nothing to see here. $1 trillion worth of gold. It's all there. We ran an audit. Believe me, I wouldn't lie about that, right? And so it seems to me that a funding panic, a money panic, is setting in as well. And I think this could actually lead to a rapid onset of a financial crisis that might make the 2008 financial crisis look like a child's play. And I've been kind of predicting a bonds Armageddon pretty much since 2021, since the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, and it has played out a little bit. We did have very strong bear market in treasury bonds, not just U.S. but also European, British, since 2021. But then they stabilized 23, 24, 25, and now they're coming under pressure again. And I think that the pressure is going to be such that we might see a very, very painful crisis and extreme price drops on treasury bonds in the West, and spikes in interest rates. And that may sound like abstract stuff, but the price of the 10-year treasury note in the United States is far and away the most important price in the world, because it impacts all other markets as well. And once that goes, everything goes, because that's also collateral for most financial institutions in the world. So if the value of your collateral falls by half, you're going to have to be hiding that. You're going to have to be hiding that you're broke. And the only way that you can hide this is by printing money out of thin air and plugging up those holes, which is a path to hyperinflation. So we're looking at an unraveling that could become like the Weimar Republic in Germany last century, or collapse of the Soviet Union. This is extremely dramatic stuff. And I think that in part it explains the Trump administration's desperation, that they're fighting a war they know they cannot win, but they can't walk away. They can't admit defeat.
Yeah. How do you see the role of GCC countries? Do you consider any sort of role for these countries, or they're basically being used by the United States as some sort of battleground, some sort of fund, or maybe political, or some sort of help economically to the war? Because the war is as you've mentioned, someone has to pay for this war, for the continuation of this war. And is it all about GCC countries paying for that?
I think that's what it's coming down to. Trump's talk about 20% imposing 20% tariffs, 20% fees on cargoes passing through the Strait of Hormuz was a foreshadowing of the shakedown that's coming for the Gulf kingdoms. And then, I think that they maybe had a second thought about this. It doesn't look good, bad optics there, and probably very alienating for the Gulf kingdoms. So he came up with like, oh yeah, they're going to invest in U.S. economy. So what are we talking about here? The GCC countries have an estimated of about $5 trillion invested in Western financial institutions. The cash and their sovereign wealth asset funds. And this is fully 1/3 of the global sovereign asset money in the world. And so that's a huge amount of money that now the Trump administration is going to be tempted to take. And we know that they have no scruples. When the push comes to shove, they're going to make up reasons why, basically, whether they like it or not, the Gulf kingdoms and sheikdoms are going to be paying for this war. And so I think that they perfectly understand this. I have to assume that if your existence is in question, your attention is very sharply focused on ongoing events. I think that MBS, MBZ, all of these leaders in the Gulf can read the writing on the wall. They understand that the United States is an empire in decline. They understand that American protection that they've been paying for is very ineffective. All these Lamborghini, Ferrari weapon systems that look really nice on paper and in perfectly staged conditions don't really work in real war conditions. They're extremely expensive, and the United States is not able to produce them in significant enough volumes to make any difference. At the same time, Iran has been preparing for this for a long time. They are an emerging regional power, and this war is existential for them. So Iran is not about to roll over. Iran is not going to be brought to the negotiating table with bombs. Iran is going to fight to the bitter end, meaning, complete eviction of Western colonialist powers from the region. And it's not just Iran at this point. Iran has full support from China and from Russia and from Pakistan and from North Korea, And so I think that the world has understood what they're up against. And if Iran is allowed to fall, everybody might fall. That might be picked off one by one. And so they understand that they need to back Iran. I believe that probably, with the possible exception of MBZ of the UAE, I think that they understand this. And I suspect, I would be surprised if they didn't have hotlines with the Iranians, saying, look, we can't openly defy the empire, but we want this war to cause minimum damage between us. We want to preserve peace as much as possible between us. And these, these attacks by the Saudis on Yemen, on Sana'a, I suspect those might be false flag attacks to make it impossible for Saudi Arabia to stay out of the war. They want to push Saudi Arabia and Iraq and Syria and all the Gulf states and Azerbaijan and everybody to unite against Iran, because the United States cannot, or Israel cannot, win that war themselves. But I think it's failing, because everybody can see that this is a losing gambit. At the same time, the Gulf kingdoms are in a very difficult position. As I said, they have an estimated $5 trillion in assets sitting in the West. They're probably going to lose it all. And the functioning of their states depends on this money. It depends on having access to this money. So if they lose access to this money, if they cannot pay salaries of teachers and police and their soldiers, they might get overthrown. They might get hung and beheaded, So I think that they're in an extremely difficult position there. So I think they're going to try to kind of arbitrage the situation to not antagonize Iran too much, but also not antagonize the Americans and the Israelis too much, and then hope that the storm will blow over without tearing down their houses.